They say the zoo is a place of wonder during the day. Children laughing, families pointing at exotic creatures behind glass and iron bars, the smell of popcorn mixed with the earthy scent of animals. It all feels so safe, so controlled. But when the sun goes down, when the last family drives out of the parking lot, when the gates lock shut and the lights begin to dim one by one, the zoo becomes something else entirely. Something darker. Something that no tour guide will ever tell you about. Welcome back, everyone, to Mr. Shadow's Stories. I'm glad you're here tonight. Or maybe I should feel a little guilty about that, because once you hear what I'm about to share with you, you may never look at a zoo the same way again. Tonight, we're exploring 5 creepy true stories from the people who know what really happens inside a zoo after midnight. The night keepers. The brave, often underpaid, often very alone men and women who walk those dark pathways when every rational person is fast asleep. They went in expecting a quiet shift. What they found was anything but. So get comfortable, turn the lights down if you're feeling brave, and whatever you do, don't look behind you. Let's begin. Story 1. Something was walking beside me. Our first story comes from a man we'll call Daniel. He worked as a night keeper at a large zoological park in the American Midwest for almost 4 years. Daniel was an experienced keeper, calm, logical, not the type to scare easily. He'd worked nights for most of his adult life and considered himself someone who was completely comfortable with darkness and solitude. That changed on a Tuesday night in late October. Daniel's usual routine involved making rounds through the big cat section every 2 hours, checking on the lions, the leopards, and a pair of rare black panthers the zoo had recently acquired. The panthers, in particular, required close monitoring because they were still adjusting to their new enclosure. On this particular night, everything started normally. Daniel did his first round at 10 p.m. without any issues. The animals were calm. The panthers were resting. All was quiet. But during his second round at midnight, something felt different. He later described it as a pressure in the air, like the atmosphere itself had changed. He noticed that the big cats, all of them, were awake. Not agitated, not pacing, just awake. And they were all staring in the same direction. Not at Daniel, at the pathway beside him. Daniel stopped walking. He swept his flashlight across the path. Nothing, just the concrete walkway stretching ahead into darkness, lined on both sides by thick landscaped bushes. He shrugged it off and kept walking. That's when he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the concrete path, keeping perfect pace with his own. Step by step. When he walked, they walked. When he slowed, they slowed. Daniel stopped completely. The footsteps stopped. His flashlight trembled slightly in his hand as he swept the beam around. Left, right, behind him. Nothing, no one, not a single person or animal is out of place. He told himself it was an echo. Old zoos have strange acoustics, he reasoned. Sound bounces off the enclosure walls in strange ways. He was hearing himself, that was all. He took 3 steps forward. The footsteps returned, but this time they were slightly out of sync, as if whatever was walking beside him had hesitated for just a fraction of a second before following. Daniel ran. He didn't stop until he reached the keeper's office, locked the door, and sat with his back against the wall until his supervisor arrived at 5 a.m. He never once saw anything, but the panthers watched that pathway the entire night. The cameras later revealed nothing on the path beside Daniel.
And yet, when the footage was reviewed closely by his supervisor, there was one detail that no one could explain. In the gravel along the edge of the pathway, the section the cameras could just barely catch, there were fresh impressions. Not footprints exactly, just disturbances in the gravel, evenly spaced, step by step, keeping perfect pace with Daniel's tracks. The section of gravel had been freshly raked just hours before his shift. Story 2. The exhibit was empty. The sounds were not. This story was shared online by a woman named Priya, who worked night shifts at a primate facility connected to a major zoo on the East Coast. The facility housed chimpanzees, gorillas, and several species of smaller monkeys. Priya had a deep love for primates and considered working with them, even at night, to be her dream job. For the most part, it was, until the night she heard something in the closed exhibit that made her question everything she believed about that place. The timeline is important here. One of the smaller exhibit rooms, which had previously housed 3 spider monkeys, had been temporarily cleared for renovation. The monkeys had been relocated. The room was completely empty, locked, no animals, no staff, just bare walls and metal fixtures waiting to be updated. On a quiet Wednesday night, Priya was doing her rounds when she passed the door to the empty exhibit room. Standard procedure, she didn't need to go in, she just needed to walk past and continue her route. But she stopped, because from behind that locked, empty door, she could hear something. Soft sounds, gentle, almost playful. The unmistakable sound of something small moving on a metal surface, a light rhythmic tapping, and then something that made the hair on her arms stand straight up, a quiet, breathy vocalization, the kind of sounds spider monkeys make when they're content, when they're playing. Priya stood motionless outside that door for almost a full minute. She told herself she was imagining things. She'd been around primates long enough that maybe her brain was filling in sounds out of habit. She was tired. It was 2 a.m. She pressed her ear gently to the door. The sound stopped instantly, as if whatever was inside had heard her, as if it knew she was listening. Then, after 5 seconds of total silence, the tapping started again. Slower this time, more deliberate, moving gradually towards the door, towards her. Priya stepped back. She radioed her supervisor, explained the situation, and waited. When her supervisor arrived with the master key and they opened the door together, the room was completely empty. No animals, no people, no holes in the walls or ceiling through which something could have entered or escaped. The ventilation covers were fully sealed and screwed in place. The drain in the floor was too small for anything beyond a mouse. But along the metal feeding shelf that ran the length of the far wall, there were small, fresh smudge marks, evenly distributed, like tiny handprints, wiped almost clean, but not quite. 3 sets. Priya requested a transfer to a different section of the facility within the week. She never worked near the primate building again. Story 3. She warned me to leave. This account comes from a night keeper named Marcus, who worked at the Wildlife Conservation Zoo in the UK for 6 years. Marcus is now retired and shared this story during a late-night online discussion forum dedicated to unusual experiences in the animal care profession. Marcus described himself as deeply skeptical of anything supernatural. He was a practical man who believed in science and logic above all else. He shared his story not because he expected people to believe him, but because, in his own words, "It has never stopped bothering me, and I need people to know it happened." It was a winter night, cold, clear, with frost forming on the pathways between enclosures. Marcus was on his standard patrol when he approached the elephant habitat, a large outdoor space with an adjacent indoor barn for the animals to shelter in during cold months. He noticed immediately that the senior female elephant, a 40-year-old matriarch named Ruth, was standing alone at the far side of her indoor space. This wasn't unusual. What was unusual was her behavior. Ruth was rocking. Elephants rock when they're distressed. Any keeper will tell you that. It's a sign of anxiety, discomfort, or psychological stress. Marcus took note and stepped inside the barn quietly, speaking to Ruth in a low, calm voice the way he always did. Ruth stopped rocking. She turned and looked directly at Marcus. And then she did something that made his blood run cold. She turned her body and positioned herself between Marcus and the far corner of the barn, slowly, deliberately, like she was placing herself as a barrier. Marcus shone his flashlight into the far corner. Nothing. But Ruth would not move. Every time Marcus attempted to step around her to inspect the corner, she shifted her weight and repositioned herself in front of him, gently but firmly, over and over. Marcus was not afraid of Ruth. He'd known her for years, but he recognized that she was communicating something with absolute clarity. Don't go there. He trusted her. He backed out of the barn, made a full note in the incident log, and requested that the area be inspected the following morning in daylight with a full team. The morning inspection team found nothing in the corner of the barn, but they did find something just outside the barn's rear wall, on the exterior grounds that Marcus would have had to walk through to complete his normal patrol route. A large section of the outer fence had partially collapsed inward. If Marcus had continued his standard route that night, he would have walked directly into it in the darkness. The metal frame, under tension, was positioned in a way that investigators said could have caused serious injury, or worse, if someone had walked into it unexpectedly at night. Ruth had stopped him from going that way. Whether she sensed the fence, whether she heard something structural in the dark, or whether something else entirely guided her behavior that night, Marcus never claimed to know. He only knows that she protected him, and that whatever was in that corner of the barn, he is grateful he never found out. Story 4: The Figure at the Birdhouse. This next story is one of the most widely discussed accounts in online keeper communities. It was originally shared by a night keeper named Sandra, who worked at a large municipal zoo in Canada. Sandra was responsible for overnight monitoring of the aviary, a massive climate-controlled building that housed hundreds of exotic bird species. The aviary was her favorite place. She described it as peaceful, warm, and almost meditative at night when the birds were quiet and resting. She no longer feels that way. On an otherwise unremarkable night shift, Sandra was approaching the aviary building from the outside path when she noticed something through the large glass panels that made up the building's front wall. A figure, standing inside the aviary. Human in shape, tall, standing completely still near the central water feature, surrounded by roosting birds. Sandra immediately assumed it was another keeper, though no one was scheduled to be in the aviary that night. She called her radio, no response. She called out, nothing. She badged herself in through the side entrance and stepped inside. The figure was gone. But every single bird in the aviary was awake. Hundreds of birds, species that should have been completely dormant at 3 a.m., were awake, alert, and all facing the same direction, toward the central water feature where the figure had been standing. Not a single bird made a sound. Sandra told this detail to friends later, and they struggled to understand why it was frightening. She explained it this way: birds make noise. They always make noise. Even at night, even roosting, there are soft sounds, breathing, rustling, small vocalizations. The total silence of hundreds of birds, all awake, all staring at the same point, was the single most terrifying thing she had ever experienced. She backed out of the aviary slowly, never turning her back to the room, and reported the sighting. Security reviewed every camera angle from inside and outside the building. The cameras showed Sandra entering. They showed the birds wide awake and silent, all facing the water feature. They did not show a figure. They did not show anyone entering or leaving the building before Sandra's arrival. But the motion sensors, which were calibrated to detect movement inside the aviary for animal welfare monitoring, had logged a detection event 9 minutes before Sandra arrived. Something had moved inside that building, something the cameras had not captured. Sandra completed the rest of her shift in the main office with every light on. Story 5. The Voice in the Reptile House. Our final story tonight is perhaps the most deeply unsettling of all. It comes from a keeper named Joel, who worked night shifts in a reptile house for just under 2 years before resigning abruptly. He shared this account in a handwritten letter that was later transcribed and posted to a wildlife workers community board with his permission. Joel's letter began with the following line that I'll read to you directly. "I am not a fearful person, but I left that job because I became afraid of what I might hear next." The reptile house, Joel explained, was always the least popular assignment among night keepers, not because of the animals. Experienced keepers are comfortable with reptiles, but because of the atmosphere. The building was old, poorly lit at night, and designed with a winding interior pathway that curved around large enclosures. At night, only the dim heat lamps inside the enclosures casting a dull orange glow. It was like walking through the interior of something alive. Joel worked the reptile house alone 5 nights a week. For the first several months, nothing unusual occurred. He grew accustomed to the sounds, the slow drag of movement inside enclosures, the occasional knock of a water dish, the mechanical hum of the climate control systems. But around the 8-month mark, something new began. A voice. Not a scream, not a growl. A voice, low and quiet, coming from somewhere deeper in the building, speaking words Joe could never quite make out. He described it as hearing a conversation happening one room away. You know someone is talking, you can feel the shape of the words, but you cannot understand them. The first time it happened, Joe walked the entire building systematically. Every corridor, every maintenance room, every supply closet. He found no one. He reported it. A sweep was conducted the following day. No evidence of entry, no gaps in the building's security. But the voice came back 3 nights later, then 2 nights after that. Always the same, low, indistinct, deeper in the building, always stopping the moment Joel got close to where he thought it was coming from. And then, in a moment of terrible clarity, something spoke directly into the air beside Joel's ear, close enough that he felt the displaced air against his skin, in a tone that was calm and low and completely without emotion. It said his name. Not a noise, not an animal sound, not an echo or a malfunction of the building's audio system. His name. Joe walked out of the reptile house that night and never returned. He called his supervisor from the parking lot at 2 a.m., resigned over the phone, and drove home. In his letter, he concluded with these words:
"I have never told my family the real reason I left that job. I tell them it was the hours. It was not the hours. I left because whatever was in that building learned my name, and I did not want to find out what it planned to do with it. 5 stories, 5 ordinary people, 5 nights they will never, ever forget. The zoo, as it turns out, is not simply a place where animals are kept safe from the world. Sometimes, it seems, it is a place where something else is kept hidden from the rest of us. Something that only reveals itself when the lights go out, when the crowds disappear, when there is no one left but one lone keeper with a flashlight and a radio that no one else will answer in time. Now, here's something worth thinking about. The people in these stories all shared one thing in common. They trusted their instincts. Daniel ran when his gut told him to. Priya stepped back from that door. Marcus followed Ruth's warning. Sandra never turned her back on that room. Joel walked out and didn't look back. Your instincts exist for a reason. Whether it is broad daylight or the deepest hour of the night, when something tells you that a place has changed, that the air is different, that something is wrong, listen to that voice inside you. It has kept human beings alive for thousands of years. Don't let curiosity be the thing that costs you. These keepers knew their environments better than almost anyone, and still, something found a way to remind them that there are things in this world that do not follow the rules of the known and the understood. And those things, they are patient. They wait for the dark, and they are always watching. Pause. Music swells slightly. Thank you so much for spending this night with me here at Mr. Shadow's Stories. If these stories reached into your chest and squeezed, good. That means you were paying attention. If you want more nights like this one, more true stories pulled from the darkest corners of real human experience, then make sure you subscribe to Mr. Shadow's Stories and hit that notification bell. Because I promise you, the stories I have waiting for you are only getting darker. New stories, new horrors, new nights you won't forget. I'll see you in the shadows.